right. Awesome to see so many people here. Thank you so much for coming. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Product 101. So going from ideation to execution. And we're going to have a particular focus on storytelling and how storytelling and product building kind of interrelate with one another, and how you can look at solving a real problem in 24 hours. And also why it's so important to think about solving a real problem in this time. My name is Gabriel. I'm one of the Associate Product Managers here at Atlassian. I work on Smart Platform, so all of the AI and ML applications that we use across our different products. Izzy?
Hey guys, my name's Izzy. A little bit confusing because we've got two Izzy's here from Atlassian, but I'm Izzy Kohout, like the game, or you can just call me Izzy K, whatever works. And I'm also an APM, and I work on our new products, which is a super, super exciting space to be in, and also on our linking platform. Oh.
Oops.
Cool. Before we get into it, we just wanted to say a massive thank you to Syncs and UCID for having us. We're like super excited to be here. We've been on the other end of it. We've definitely both participated in our fair share of Syncs hacks. So we're super excited to be on the other end of it. I just give a quick intro to Atlassian in case you guys haven't heard of us. Essentially, we are a software company, and our mission is that we believe behind every great human achievement, there is a team, and our mission is to unleash the potential in every team. So we build software that helps teams work better together.
So I'm sure you're familiar with at least a couple of these. Some of the products that we have are Trello, for sort of project management and task management, Bitbucket, Confluence for knowledge management, and Jira. Now, I just wanted to make another call out here, which is we love hackathons. It's sort of embedded within our company culture. And the way that we do this is every quarter we have Ship It. And Ship It is very similar to this. It's 24 hours of innovation. And it means you can work on whatever it is that you want to work on. Another really cool thing here is we tend to see a lot of grads doing well. So a team of grads actually won the last Ship It, which finished last week. And it's a really, really cool opportunity to, work with a lot of other really smart people to build something that you might not otherwise have the chance to build in your day-to-day work. So we really love it, and it's something that you get to experience at Atlassian and is a lot of fun. So today we're going to talk through three things. Firstly is defining a problem. So what actually is a problem when you look at it from a hackathon perspective or from a product perspective? What makes a good problem to solve? What are the sorts of problems you should consider looking at? We're then going to talk about finding a solution to that problem. So how do you come up with really great ideas? And then how do you boil that down to an idea that you might actually be able to solve within the 24 hours that we have? And then we're going to talk about storytelling. So you really want to make sure that all of the hard work that you put in and all of kind of the great innovative thinking that you do gets translated into a story. And we're going to talk about why that's so important and how you can do that really effectively for your pitches.
Alrighty, we'll get started with the problem. I just want to mention that when Gabriel was talking about the winning team for Ship It, he was actually on that winning team. He's just being humble. So props to Gabriel. All right, so starting with problem, I'm going to talk through three important things. The first is solving a real problem and what that looks like. The second is the types or classes of problem that I want us to be thinking about. And the third is, okay, given these classes of problem, how do I decide which one to solve for? So starting with solving a real problem, this sounds obvious in a lot of ways, but it's not actually necessarily that easy to get right. And it's 100% the most important part of product, startups, and hackathons, because hackathons are just product and startups on steroids, right? It's often the defining feature between ventures and products that are super successful and ones that aren't. And it's often why you see people that are maybe have some really flashy technical solution not succeed as you would expect them to, because they haven't started with that problem. So super, super important. And one thing I do really want to call out as well is that half the job of defining the problem is actually being able to communicate it clearly. So once you understand your problem and you've got it all formulated in your head, you're not actually done until you can translate that idea into someone else's head. So ideally, your entire team is able to summarize the specific problem that you're solving in max 2 sentences. Like, give me the super snappy elevator pitch. Basically, you want to make the people that you're speaking to give a crap about the product that you're building. All right. So the way that we like to think of this in product, and a mental model that I find really helpful, is thinking about these 2 types of problem. The first is macro problems, and the second is micro problems. So macro problems are a very like big picture systems level trend. So there's something that's wrong with the world. So you can say I've got examples of like global hunger, poverty, access to education, global warming. We're going big, we're going drastic, okay? So that's what we think of when we think of like gender inequality, like big problems. That's what we think of when we think of the class 1 macro problem. Class 2, we've got the micro problems. Massive call out here is that the word micro does not mean these problems are small or unimportant at all. The way that they differ from macro problems is that they are felt by people. So they're specific, they're personal, and they're often emotional. We like them to take the form as a blank. I feel blank because blank, or when blank. That's not a must have. I don't want that to be like a prescriptive formula for you guys, but just so that you kind of get the idea of the kind of things I'm talking about. So given that we now have those 2 classes of problems, a really important part of the hackathon obviously is choosing a good problem to solve. I think it makes sense to focus on micro problems for a hackathon because people use products, so let's build for people. If the macro problem is something that you are really passionate about and you have identified some macro problem that you really want to have a crack at solving, macro problems are made up of a bunch of smaller micro problems. They're decomposed into a bunch of smaller micro problems. So try to identify one of the micro problems that you can solve that will ladder up to your macro problem. And to do this, you really want to put yourself in the shoes of your user. You really want to be thinking, what do they feel? What do they care about? What motivates them? What's going to drive them to do certain things? And that's going to get you a lot closer to being able to solve the problem for them because you understand what the problem is. And another major call out, I have bolded and capitalized this so you know it's important, is that it should be specific. So the example I've got there is an example of a good personal micro problem is, as a young person living alone in Sydney, I feel overwhelmed when I think about trying to reduce my household food wastage. I don't even know where to start. The less specific, less well-formulated version of that problem would be something like, oh, food wastage is bad and we want to reduce it. And that's the problem that I want to solve. Beautiful. On to the next section.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about going from a problem to a solution. Now, the first thing is, if you don't have a really well-defined problem, it's so hard to come up with a solution that makes sense. And you'll see this all the time in like VC land and tech in general, is that people come up with solutions without proper reference to a problem and they don't go anywhere and they almost inevitably fail. So we really need to make sure we have some sort of specific problem nailed down before we start. But then how do we turn that into something that is, 1, a meaningful solution, and 2, works really well and is something you can do within 24 hours? So the first thing is, I'd really encourage you to think moonshot here. Now, really what we want to do, there's this wonderful quote, which is that startups are a bet on a vision for the future of the world. And I think that's really true, even for something in 24 hours like a hackathon. When you're building a product, you are taking a bet on the future of the world. And if you have a vision of the future of the world, that needs to be big. It needs to be something that you really go large on. Think game changers. Think cars, don't think iterative, like faster horses. So right from the beginning of your ideation, you should be thinking, what's the craziest, best thing you can do? You can worry about cutting it down later, but start with the big solutions. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere meaningful. Now, one way of doing this that has worked really well for us in the past is to do something called crazy eights. So you literally fold a piece of paper so that you have 8 different squares on it, and you take 8 minutes to think of 8 really wild ideas. The really good thing you do here is you go for quantity instead of quality. And that stops your brain judging your ideas as you come up with them. And what you'll find is every single idea is more crazy than the last one. Don't worry about constraints. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Just start going moonshot and start with the craziest things that you can think of. It'll pay off down the line. Now, once you have a series of crazy ideas, there's a few ways. If you have a team of people and you have these, all of you have done these crazy eights, you can do some sort of voting to see which ones make sense for people if you want to kind of narrow it down. But once you do narrow it down, we need to think, what can we actually build in this time? So I'm sure a lot of you have come across this concept, but there's a really important concept in tech, and we use this nonstop. This is a massive part of our jobs, called an MVP. Now, an MVP is a minimum viable product. Now, every word in this is important, so I'm going to go through it word by word. It needs to be minimum because it needs to be the smallest possible thing that you can do, because if it's not the smallest thing you can do, you don't have time to do it in 24 hours. But it also needs to be viable. And when I say viable, it actually needs to solve the problem or tell a story about solving the problem that you've decided that you want to solve. And product just means it's something that you can demo and that you can test with your first users. We call these your early adopters. So there's actually 2 purposes of an MVP. The first one is that it allows you to demonstrate value in a very short space of time. So if you're in a hackathon, it means you have something to pitch in that time that can really show what your vision of the future is. If you are in, you're starting a startup or you're working at Atlassian and you're building something, like Izzy works in new products and you do a lot of this sort of thing in new products, it lets you test things with your users. So it's the smallest thing you can use to test whether you're right about the vision of the future that you have, whether people actually want it. But in the case of a hackathon, the most important thing about this is it allows you to demonstrate the value that you're trying to provide in a really short space of time. So let's talk about what that actually looks like, because there's a little bit of nuance here. Let's take the example of Trello. Trello is a massive part of Atlassian. We all use it a lot in our work and in our personal lives as well. Some of us have very beautiful Trello boards that track every single thing that we do. And if you look at it today, it's really, really feature rich. So there's automation in there. There's integrations with things like Calendar, Google Drive. There's images that go there. You can do checklists. You can assign tasks to people. You have labels. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But you have to keep in mind that this is a product that has been around for a while now. If you look at what their minimum viable product was, it was a heck of a lot simpler. It looked like this. So all you had was a bunch of buckets, and in each bucket, you could put some text representing a task. That was it. So you can really see, if we look from before to now, it's really changed a lot. But this actually represents the core value of Trello. The core value of Trello, being able to visualize the work that you have across different categories, is baked into this. And that's why it's so powerful. So the people who, if you had this in a hackathon, you could show that value. And there will be people who look at that and go, oh, I get that. I really, really need that. And that's what you want with an MVP. So that's a really, really good example. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about is time. So you are pretty tight with time in a hackathon, obviously. And there's ways that you can manage your time to make the most of it. So the thing that you should always be asking yourself is, does this help me build my MVP? And if it does, then use it. And if it doesn't, don't. It's really, really simple. I want to give a little bit of nuance as to a few ways that you can do this well. The first one is use the greats. So there's a whole bunch of fantastic tools, APIs, frameworks that already exist out there that you can use. So there's things for messaging, there's things for auth, there's things for everything that you can imagine. So don't be afraid to use those things that already exist. In a hackathon, it's great. It kind of looks like magic, because with very small amounts of effort, you can suddenly have a chat tool waiting. have a search for Hackathon Starter on Google. There'll be a whole bunch of kind of frameworks and things that give you a really good head start here. The next tip I have for you is mock everything that you can. So one of the really classic mistakes that people make at the beginning of hackathons is they go, do I need a relational database? Do I want to use DynamoDB? Do I want to be using MySQL, Django, Express? What's the backend going to be like? Take a step back. Those are the wrong questions to be asking in 24 hours, because those are not likely to be the things that really help you solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Mock it as much as you can. So if that means that you have a JSON file with your data in and you just read from a JSON file, that's absolutely fine. If you can build an MVP using a spreadsheet, there's a lot of really, really famous products that have started with spreadsheets as their databases. So just don't be afraid to do that. You always want to ask, what is the simplest way I can show the value that I'm trying to show? The last thing about time is tame the chaos. Product building, whether you're in a startup, whether you're in a big company like Atlassian, it's never easy. And it's always messy. And hackathons, it's particularly messy. So plans are never, ever going to go the way that you think that they're going to go. But that's okay. That's absolutely fine. That's part of the fun of it. So what you need to do, a few really good tips are communicate often and well with your team. That communication pays off so well, particularly in a remote world. Break down your work into discrete chunks and then plan with it. The more you can break down your work and plan, the clearer that communication with your team is going to be. And the other thing you want to remember is it's okay to pivot. You might start and go, I've got this crazy, amazing idea, and you get 10 hours in and you go, look, there's no way that I'm going to manage to get this done. That's totally fine. It's not a problem. It's really, really normal. And it can be a really effective strategy to pivot. The really important thing you want to make sure you do is have something to show at the end of it. You really want to have that. It's really hard to finish all this great work and not have anything to show for it.
All right. Let's talk about how to tell a good story. All right. So the most important thing is to create a narrative. A lot of the time we can fall into the trap of thinking like, okay, I've done the work and then I have to present it. But I would really encourage you to think instead as the presentation is part of the work, and it's really, really your chance to get your audience invested. You could build the best product that solves the world's most pressing problem, but if you don't communicate that properly, I'm not going to care about it, right? I mean, I probably will care about it, but you know what I mean. for the sake of the point, no one's going to care about it. So one really fantastic tip to do that, and one thing that's really, really important, is to make us feel it. So humans are social creatures, and that means that we respond really well to stories about other people, other people's problems, other people's emotions, logic, statistics, technical language. That's all great evidence. Obviously, you're going to need to be using technicalities to demo your product, and you're going to probably want to talk about some of the technicalities there, but that's only going to get you so far in telling a really, really convincing story. So I'd really encourage you to lean heavily on those sort of emotional, personal problems that we talked about at the start, which ties it nicely into that. Some general presentation tips that we have for you. So as I said, you're not finishing the work of them presenting it, the presentation is part of the work. And the reason that that is really important is because if you have that mindset, you're more likely to actually leave enough time for the presentation. This is like a classic hackathon trap that people fall into, that I've fallen into, that Gabriel's fallen into, is that you don't leave enough time for the presentation and you're sitting there like, 10 minutes to judging, like frantically scrambling together your Google slides, and it's very stressful. And it means that you're not communicating the value of the work that you've done, and you're doing yourself a disservice. So really make sure you're leaving enough time for that. A good way to do that is to just put somebody in charge of the presentation and have them accountable for having it done. That does not mean that they're responsible for doing the entire presentation. It just means that they might be accountable for that deliverable. They can, obviously have other people helping them, etc. But it's good to have somebody that's keeping track of where that is. And then the last thing is, in your presentation, obviously it's important to be honest about where you're actually at and the progress that you've made. So as much as it is a sell, it is a story. Obviously, you do want to be realistic about what you've achieved. I wanted to give an example format of a presentation for you guys. For context, this is actually the format that we use for our Ship It presentations. This is the format that Gabriel used for his winning Ship It presentation, which is, as I said at the start, the internal Atlassian Hackathon. So this is a tried and true formula. And I'll just talk through it quickly because it'll give you a good idea of the kind of things that have worked in the past. This is doesn't need to be prescriptive. You don't have to do it this way, but just so that you can get an idea. So the first thing is to outline the problem space. Here we want to go a little bit big picture. This is where you can tie your micro problem into your macro problem, and you can start to talk about what's wrong with the world today. The second thing is to go specific. So this is where you go into your micro problem. Who is that affecting that you want to help and how? The third thing is to outline existing solutions. So inevitably the people that you've chosen to help, or the customer segment or the personas that you've chosen to target with your product, are doing something to solve that problem now. So how are they doing that? Why isn't it working? What are the flaws in it? And this is where you can allude to how you're going to do that 100 times better. Fourth thing is to introduce your solution. Now, the reason this is separate to the demo is because if I'm watching a presentation on a product and, team's done this amazing, oh, here's this problem, I'm so invested in it, I really care about it. And then they jump straight into, okay, the way we're going to solve it is with relational database, these are the technicalities. I'm like, whoa, what does it do? 2 sentences, what's the value that it's delivering? So introduce your solution, give me the 2-sentence elevator pitch. What is the value that you're providing to your user group? And how is this better than any of the other solutions that they could have access to? Super important. Then it's what everyone's waiting for, good old demo time. So that's when you can show us how you're providing that value, show off all your flashy implementation. And number 6 is obviously talking about the benefits of that approach that you've chosen. So why is this such a brilliant solution compared to anything else that exists? This is where you can really, show off all of the work that you've done. And then last but not least, number 7, future potential. So this is where you want to sell where this could go next and how is it going to get there. Some people call this like a future roadmap. It doesn't necessarily need to be that specific. If you want it to be, that's great. But the point of this is to essentially translate this fantastic idea that you have in your head of everything that this could be to the audience's head, and really, really make that connection from what's in front of them in this MVP to what this could be, 6 months down the line, a year down the line. So yeah, really selling that future vision.
Awesome. So just to recap really quickly, we've looked at 3 things. So firstly, it's the problem. So making sure that you're really, really specific about a problem to begin with, and making sure that you're solving a problem for people and being specific about who those people are. At the end of the day, people have problems. Companies don't have problems. The world doesn't have a problem. People feel the problems. Then we talk about the solution. So starting out really big with your ideas, going moonshot, and then filtering that down to an MVP, which is the minimum thing that you can build that shows the value and that demonstrates the value that you're trying to provide to people. Then we talked about managing your time. So making sure that you are doing every decision you make is helping you demonstrate that value. That's the number 1 thing you want to be thinking about. And finally, we talked about the story. So if you don't have a compelling story to tell, unfortunately, it doesn't matter how wonderful your solution is, it's really, really hard to make people give a crap about it. So we really want to make sure that we have a great story. And this really is true in hackathons, and it's true in, in the VC world as well. Unfortunately, there's a lot of great products out there that never got the funding that they should have because they weren't sold properly. There wasn't a proper story behind it. But we're human beings, and stories are the ways that we have to relate to the world. And so if you don't tell a story, it's really, really hard to understand what that value is and to translate that. So Any questions?
Izzy and Gabe, what a presentation. It's a masterpiece. I'm so keen to implement these tips, and I'm just organizing the hackathon. Before we get into the questions while we're waiting, I'll take a photo so we can capture the moment of you guys presenting. So people want to put on their cameras on again. If not, we got a small crew here. Okay, we'll wait a few seconds. Okay.
Chelsea, do you want to change like this first slide?
Oh, Gabe, do you want to go to the first slide? Possible? Nice.
Nice.
Okay. Nice. Okay, we got a good amount of people here now. Okay, ready? Oh, more. Okay, wow, people are really coming on. Okay, we'll just take it with this. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Smile, everyone. Lovely. Thank you. Yeah, I'll be taking a lot of photos this week, so get used to me. But yeah, on to the questions, guys.
Feel free to unmute, or you can do like a raised hands reaction.
Andrew's asked the question, how would you pitch to someone who wouldn't understand the problem or know it is a problem that you're trying to solve? Izzy, do you want to take that one?
Yes. I would say make them understand, right? Like that's the obvious answer. But there are lots of ways that you can do that. Like if it's, for example, if it's like some complex technical problem that a layperson is not going to understand, a really good tactic that I've found has been successful is to use things like metaphors, allegories, like compare it to things that people are very familiar with and that they understand. This is a bit of a random tangent, but I think it's a good example. I don't know if you guys, like when you guys are watching a YouTube video and then like the person is like, this is sponsored by ExpressVPN, and most people have no idea how the F of VPN works or what it does. But the person, if they're selling it properly, they create this explanation of a VPN as like an envelope or like a wrapper that makes your letter secure. And then they relate that back to the concept of a VPN. And that means that a layperson is able to understand that. So if you can find something similar with the problem that you're trying to solve, and try to connect with the audience that way by finding some sort of like common allegory or metaphor that they can get on your level with. Gabe, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good answer. The only thing I'd add is people don't necessarily understand every problem, but people do understand feelings. So if you can tell me how this would make somebody who does understand it feel something and what it would make them feel, then you're going to have me sold. Particularly if you're thinking about it from a judge's perspective or from a VC's perspective, you know, you're just looking for solutions to problems, great solutions to problems. So if you can sell me on, you know, what it would make somebody feel, then you've got me.
And how your solution would alleviate that feeling. I think that's great.
100%. What do you do when you think of a brilliant solution to a problem and then realize someone else has already done it? Good question. I think the classic like startup-y answer to this question is that's a really good thing. Like if you're going, you know, there's this problem that I want to solve in the world and it's really important that this problem gets solved, and you see somebody else has already solved it brilliantly, that's actually a really, really great thing. And that's like trying to think about it as not being zero sum. Like there's always more opportunities for things that you can solve. So I think at its core, that's a really good thing. I think the other way you could look at it is to go, even though somebody has solved it, have they really solved it for everybody? Because a lot of products solve a particular type of problem for a particular group of people, but maybe there's a whole group of people that aren't serviced properly by a solution at the moment. And then you kind of look at, can I apply the sort of brilliant solution that I have in that space? Would you add anything to that, Izzy?
I wouldn't add anything, but just to sort of clarify, like a group of people, like the group that you're trying to target, can almost always be broken down into subgroups of people, whether you're dissecting them by age, by technical ability, by gender, by interest, by socioeconomic income, like literally anything, by how much they care about unicorns. I don't know, like there's so many subgroups that you can draw between people. And so there's always opportunity to do that. The other thing is building off of that point is that if you build more specifically for a subgroup of people, you probably will be able to find a differentiator. So even if there's like a fantastic solution that somebody's already done, it's likely that you'll be able to find some way to differentiate. And if that's something that really matters to that subgroup, there's a good chance of success. So maybe that's something that's faster, it's easier to use, it services a greater breadth of need, like whatever that is.
Great question here, referring to the point on mock all the things. To what extent should we be doing this? What are you looking for in terms of our solution at a programming/coding level? Izzy, do you want to take that?
It's a good question. I would say mock what you can within reason. Like this goes back to the point of the MVP. You want it to be such that we understand what the value is. Like if the core value of the product is that it does X task 5% or 10% or 20% faster than any of the other products, and that's like the core value, you're probably going to want to have the technical implementation to back that up, if that makes sense. Gabriel, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like you are always thinking, how does this demonstrate the value? So if it's core to demonstrating the value, you need to make us believe that it's possible. Another good example of this, I remember a wonderful winner of Syncs Hack a few years ago was using the blockchain. Now, if you're going to say this solution works and it's going to change lives, but it's contingent on the use of the blockchain, please implement something on the blockchain. But that thing on the block, like I don't really care whether you need to go back and then spend a month or 2 months, getting it to work properly and sorting out all the security and all these sorts of things. Those are details. But if you build something on the blockchain to begin with, then I look at it and I go, okay, I believe you. I believe you that this will work. On the other hand, databases are a solved problem. And unless the database is absolutely core to how you're solving the problem, we don't really need to see exactly how you've implemented the database. Like I'm not particularly interested in it because I know that at some point you can go back and set up a database that's going to do this. You don't need to convince me about that.
Unless the corner case is that your problem that you're trying to solve is that you're drawing data out of the database 20% faster or whatever it is, then we're probably going to want to see it.
Exactly. I would say that doesn't mean that, don't have any data there at all. It just means that I genuinely will not care whether something is set up with a, relational database or whether something is, just sitting in a JSON file somewhere 99% of the time. But you should probably have it somewhere.
Hey guys, sorry, I had a question. Thanks for the workshop, by the way. So Izzy, you mentioned to tie in the micro problem with the macro problem when we're outlining our problem space. And I wanted to ask if you had any examples or any suggestions for how to go about this.
Yeah, for sure. Caveat being that's not necessary, but if it's relevant to the particular problem that you're trying to solve. Okay, let me think of an example. Okay, so an example could be, say the macro problem is gender inequality in tech or gender inequality in STEM, right? That's my favorite topic. I could talk about that for hours. My micro problem is something like, as a young woman in high school in years 9 to 12, it's overwhelming and scary and difficult to consider doing STEM subjects for the HSC, right? As an example. That's a personal problem. That's something we can relate to, something we feel. The macro problem that I could tie that up to is the fact that 13% of the engineering workforce is female. whatever the statistics for representation of women in tech are. And you could go even bigger. You could be like, look, gender inequality is a problem globally, like da 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 da. And in terms of how you turn that into like a presentation, you can start with your stats if you want to. You can be like, boom, big eye-catching statistic that makes people go, oh my God, that's horrible. And then you can tie it into the personal problem, let's put a face to this problem. Meet Jenny, she's blah, blah, blah. And you go into that sort of a thing. Or you can flip it. You can start with the personal and go, meet Jenny, she's a girl in year 9 and she feels all of these problems. But this is not just a problem for Jenny. Around the globe, thousands of girls, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So that's how I would think about that narrative, tying those two things together. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Sweet, no worries.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. That's time for us. So I will pass over to the next crew.
Thanks for having us. Awesome to be here.
Thanks, Izzy and Gabriel. Thank you. That was very enlightening.